gathered together for this incredible event, Caste Conversation, presented by Dalit Matter. I am Shaili Chaudhary, a Marwari by caste, a Madhesi by geographical status, and a queer by gender identity. I would like to extend a warm welcome to every one of you who are present here right now in this room as we embark on this journey of thought-provoking dialogue and discussion. Social inclusion and justice are like two peas in a pod, always destined to come together, but always separated by the walls of ignorance and prejudice. Today, we aim to dismantle those walls, bricks by brick, as we engage in an open and honest discussion about the struggles, about the experiences, and about the aspirations of the Dalit community. We are honored to have Dr. Suraj Yengde with us, an eminent scholar, activist, author who has dedicated his life to unraveling the complexities of caste and advocating for the rights of the marginalized. Before we delve deeper into this conversation, we must acknowledge and give voice to a campaign which was started 3 years ago, Dalit Lives Matter. Dalit Lives Matter represents a call to action, a demand for justice, and a refusal to accept the status quo. It is a reminder that we need to fight for the social justice, no matter which social background you come from. Recently, a new initiative, Dalit Lives Matter Global Alliance, was started to continue this campaign and take the campaign to new avenues. Through this initiative, DLM aspires to do three things. One, to create dignity defenders in all the 753 local units of Nepal who will bring the voices of marginalized. Second, to create an alliance of national and regional level in South Asia to further strengthen the Dalit movement. And the final, take the caste conversation at the global forum to talk about the issues of millions of Dalits who are traveling all around the world. Caste derived from the Portuguese term casta, really means just division and is the social identifier. So when we talk about caste, especially me as a non-Dalit, it's not just about the hierarchy in Hindu religion. It's more of that. It talks about the intersections as well. It talks about gender equality as well. It talks about class differentiation as well. It talks about the status code on the basis of geography as well. And this forum provides us a platform to question ourselves that what are our privileges, what are the status quo I am maintaining, and what I can do to stand in solidarity to bring the voices together. This is a platform to ask hard questions and do the hard talks, which we generally don't, which we hide under the carpet, say that that's not our issue. But it is. It is my issue as well. It is our issue as well. It is the issue of a non-Dalit as well. And I believe this conversation should not confine within this room as well. It should move beyond this room. It should go far and reach the very margins, the very spaces of society to talk more on this, to talk more on the discrimination, to talk more on the alliances, to talk more on the solidarity. And you don't need to be from the Dalit community to talk on that. Social justice, human rights, social inclusion should be the agenda of every person, should be the agenda of every individual, not just Pradeep Pariyar or Dr. Suraj Yengde. It should be the agenda of Shaili Chaudhary, Vikas Rai, and many other coming from non-Dalit community as well. Another great philosopher once said, Rousseau, The whole problem with the world is that fools and fanatics are always so certain of themselves. It is the wise people who are not so sure. So let's embrace that uncertainty. Let's embrace that doubt in ourselves and talk more with open heart and open mind. Because with that, we can embrace the possibility of a better future for which we fight for which we seek. So that together we can create a world where every individual can actually boogie on a dance floor of the life, unburdened by the chains of caste discrimination. In this spirit, I would also like to introduce the founder and chair of Dalit Matter Global Alliance, Mr. Dalit. Mr. Pariyar was selected one of the young global leader by World Economic Forum and was awarded Asia's 21 Young Leaders Award by Asia Society 2018. He has trained thousands of youths globally on peace building, on leadership, on conflict-sensitive journalism. He has spent more than 20 years advocating for social justice and human rights. As a Dalit himself, his remarkable journey from the margins to the forefront of the discourse has inspired a lot of youth like me and has changed the movement for a reason. So give a huge round of applause for Mr. Dalit. Thank
you. Namaskar. On behalf of Dalit Lives Matter, I warmly welcome all of you here. Welcome to the Dalit Lives Matter Caste Conversation. I extend my utmost gratitude to everyone present here today in solidarity with Dalit Lives Matter. Caste Conversation is a conscious effort to facilitate the exchange of ideas, perspectives, best practices, and learning acquired across global endeavors, responding to caste inequalities, indignities, and intersection. Thank you very much for supporting and joining with us tonight. In the last 70 years, Nepal witnessed many social and political changes, and now we have arrived at the secular and federal democratic Republic of Nepal. The dawn of new political establishment grew people's aspiration for social justice, prosperity, development, and dignified lives. Sadly, the political turbulence, feeble governance, impunity, and lack of accountability toward peoples have undermined the achievement of different movements and people's aspiration. The road to social justice seems murky, foggy, and lost. From social justice perspective, our society is becoming regressive. If we try to imagine how Nepal or the world will appear in next 100 years, we certainly see that society is moving backward in many sense. We have not been working toward Nepal we imagine. The World Economic Forum has recently published Gender Global Disparity Report, which predicts it will take another 100 years to achieve equality between the men and women. But how much longer will it take to achieve parity between Dalits and non-Dalits in Nepal, South Asia, and globally? Another 100 years? Can you guess? Another 100 years, we need to work more for that? Or 200 years? I don't know, or even longer. How much effort we will put, that determine this timeline. From the perspective of mother of Navraj Bhikhe and his friends who were killed in the Rukum incident, you recently watched the video also, social justice in Nepal has died from their perspective, their mother perspectives. The situation is no different if seen from the eyes of mother of Angira Pasi, Sundar Harijan, Vijayram Chamar, and many more. When I met the mother of Navraj Bhikhe and others, these victim mothers, they say we only have our hopes and tears left. Under such difficult circumstances, the road to social justice doesn't appear very easy. After meeting them, I was reminded of my mother and how privileged I am to lead this life. I mean, hadn't my parents struggled for our better lives and opportunity, my story would have been all the same. This realization is one of the strongest force and only reason that inspired me to keep working for dignified Dalit lives. There have been few changes during this time. I acknowledge that. The fact that some individual became a member of parliament, minister, or the other opportunity indicate that some change is taking place. The selection of some individual in government service may be considered a start, but they are not educated by themselves. Judges against the vision of the world we seek to build, there is no social justice in Nepal. Only when Nepali diversity is reflected proportionally in the state, then citizens own the country and feel that the country belongs equally to everyone. र मैले यसलाई नेपालीमा के भन्ने गरेको छु भने यो देश चाहिँ मेरो हो तर राज्य चाहिँ मेरो हुन सकिरहेको छैन, राज्य चाहिँ मेरो होइन. It has not been long since election for all three levels of government were concluded in Nepal. But even the political parties which claim to abide by the constitution didn't appear to take the issues of social justice seriously. They failed to do what was necessary to reform justice delivery. Our constitution addressed social justice and the right of Dalits, but the political parties have not been able to translate that spirit into reality. That's the sad reality. The various Dalit groups across Nepal constitute more than 13.8% of the total population. At least 37 or 38 members of the House of Representatives are required to represent Dalits in proportional for their share of the national population. However, at present, the House of Representatives is said to have only 16 Dalit members, of whom only one member is directly elected out of 165. That's also very sad reality. The very rainbow of diversity in the country has not found representation in the Nepali state. The country belongs to Dalits also, and Dalits have immense love for this country. But the Nepali state has failed to belong to Dalits. It has not become ours. I already mentioned about this. So this is our sad reality. I'm the last part of right now. However, this time too shall pass away. Not just the Dalit movement, but the movement for social justice in Nepal, seeking new beginning and next leadership, particularly in today's artificial intelligent world, tech complex world. Nepali youth are the helm of taking initiative for social, economic, and political transformation. We have witnessed Nepal's youth envision investment and integrity, and we also seek the same in social transformation. In particular, their conscious engagement to realize social justice is imperative. It is also equally important that we connect the global leaders and change makers, join hands with them, and take collaborative action toward our shared dream of egalitarian global society. On behalf of Dalit Lives Matter, I extend my solidarity and alliance with the global actors engaged tirelessly to globalize the caste agenda. I seek your support, guidance, and partnership to make meaningful impact at the local, regional, and global levels to build alliances and assert that Dalit lives do matter. In the course today, we will present to you Dr. Suraj Yengde, an acclaimed scholar and the author of the bestseller Caste Matters book. He is Bois Fellow at Harvard University and research scholar at Oxford University. Many more maybe? It is actually his personal visit to Nepal, and we grabbed this opportunity to reunite with him. Dr. Yengde is inspiration to millions of Dalit lives around the globe and close friend of mine and brother. All of us may or may not agree with Dr. Yengde's ideas. I would like to emphasize that today's talk is entirely his personal views. I hope you all initiated caste conversation at your homes. That's very important. Your workplace and everywhere where you engage. Only then will the discourse on caste question leaps forward to meaningful space. Now, without further ado, please put your hands together, Dr. Suraj Yengde. Welcome to Dr. Suraj Yengde. Thank you very much for coming.
So thank you for making time. I want to start by acknowledging the organizers of the team of Dalit Lives Matter. They put this event in a very short notice. As Pradeep had mentioned, I was here to two reasons. One is part of my next book. I would like to see how can I incorporate the Nepali Dalit discourse, the original activist space that they have been fighting from 19th century, but more so from the 1950s era. And second was to visit Lumbini, to look at the place where the enlightened one was born and get some spiritual guidance. Before I begin, I think let's give it up to the excellent team of Dalit Lives Matter Nepal and the Global Alliance for putting this together, especially the leaders. Pradeep Pariyar, I know Brother Pradeep for a long time. I've been following his excellent journey. He's been an inspiration to many Dalit people and people who are seeking dignity. His career, his trajectory has been influential. He's been nominated to many important portfolios and awards, and he sits, but more importantly, he's a very kind man. He knows how to get things done without pressurizing you. You just know the presence. I'd like to also acknowledge many people in the audience, my dear friends, brothers, sisters who are present here. Brother Santosh is here, who is now a chief whip of one of the political parties. Let's give it up him. Probably he's the first one from the Dalit community to hold such an important political portfolio. And we hope you just don't remain chief whip. You become more than a chief whip. Similarly, Rup Sunar is in audience, dear brother who was instrumental, who's been trying to get me to Nepal for some time, and he's here right now. Let's give it up to Rup Sunar as well for his presence and leadership. I would also like to acknowledge some young leaders, especially somebody I'm going to mention from within this space who have been known and for the very fortune of they writing in English and are having an access to English. The young scholar, the young breed of scholars, Mitra Pariyar, Amar Vishwakarma, also our dear sister in Nepal, Vishnu Pariyar, Sarita Pariyar, and the people who are not with us right now, but their work that has remained instrumental to us. Before I begin, I want to pay my respects to the fallen victims of caste system. Pradeep had already mentioned their names, but I would also like to offer my condolences and also affirm that their defeat, their murder is a collective failure of all of us, and it's a collective failure of Nepali and as well as the casteist society's conscience. And I think this invites us to rethink about our own ethics of living and what it really means. Nabaraj BK, whom we all know, that's kind of a sad, unfortunate, as well as Ajit Mijar, Bahadur, Sundira Pasi, Vijayaram Chamar, and Sundar Harijan, among many other brothers and sisters who have been fallen victims to caste system, and they are just not the names that are limited. If you chart the violence, these people are victims of loving. Caste society cannot appreciate love. It has never taught how to love. It has never promoted the idea, the basic essence of love. And because the absence of love, they promote hatred. And a society which teaches its children, its progenies hatred, cannot think of itself as a society that can look at itself in the mirror, as well as in the competition of becoming the world's leading nations. We have to constantly think, if you're a caste nation, you're still a nation full of hatred that's in your guts. As I was reading through Nepali history, and I could not stop but look at the legends, the great figures from this Nepali Dalit space, who have contributed immensely to making society democratic, to making society truly secular, as well as representative. And one of them I came across a Sanskritist, a Pandit, who had gone to India to study in the 19th century, Bhagat Sarvjit Biswakarma. And when I was reading about his work and his excellent contribution, who start Vishwa Sarvajan's son. Now, this idea of looking at Sarvajan as to looking at everybody is now a political contestation within the Indian sphere, where the new political discourse from Bahujan to Sarvajan, Biswakarma had already envisioned in the 19th century to think about this idea of encapsulating and bringing everybody within the fold of a samaj, of a community, where you really will not be identified based on your rank of birth or the hierarchies you come from. In addition to that, when Bhagat Sarvjit Biswakarma, as I was to learn, was somebody whose education was itself an offense for the Brahmins, and then his command in Sanskrit was even more offensive. For that, they hurled abuses, and they just did not stop him, but they put him in the jail for his agitation against casteism. Well, when they did that, they created a revolutionary within him, and many other people from other parts of the world in other parts of Nepal galvanized and started various branches of Vishwa Sarvajan Sangh. And the fault line of the Pandit Biswakarma was he was a Sanskrit scholar, of course studied in India, was a Pandit himself, and he thought, if I am educated, and I must have the right to wear the jenu, the sacred holy thread, and that was what melted down the Brahminical forces of that time, and thus they put him in jail. The second person that I would like to mention, and it comes very much in the 1950s era, or the 40s onwards, they start working, is Sarashnath Kapali. And of course, one of his brothers is Mohanlal Kapali. Now, the very interesting thing, Mohanlal Kapali is a radical Ambedkarite leader, so is Sarashnath Kapali. When Dr. Ambedkar visits Nepal, Kathmandu, for the 4th World Fellowship of Buddhist Conference, he is very much interested, and he is the local host. The Nepali Dalits are the people who are organizing under the organization called Nepal Rashtriya Pariganit Jan Vikas Sangh. And within this auspices, they host Dr. Ambedkar here in Kathmandu. They take him around various neighborhoods where Dalits are, especially ghettos. Dr. Ambedkar is very much pained, and the anecdote goes as such, that when Dr. Ambedkar goes and he sees the very pitiable situation of fellow Dalits, he is alarmed and he's unhappy. A local bureaucrat who is assisting Dr. Ambedkar into these places, he notices that displeasure, and when Dr. Ambedkar when this message is conveyed to the then Prime Minister of Nepal, he proposes a meeting with Dr. Ambedkar, and visibly upset, Dr. Ambedkar refuses to meet, and that's when the Prime Minister of Nepal comes down to meet him and assures Dr. Ambedkar that they are doing the best, and for the new laws that will be brought out will bring justice. Of course, that was yet to come until 2015 of our times. With that, within this auspices, there was another radical leader that was coming up within the shadows of these giants Kapalis. That leader, T.R. Biswakarma, who went on to become member of parliament, but also lead a very fiery agitation against caste discrimination in this land. T.R. Biswakarma, again, we all know, and this is fortunate, I was reading some of his works as to how they thought of forming and creating a new movement. And with T.R. Biswakarma, one of the most loyal activists and companions was himself his wife, the partner, Mithai Devi Biswakarma, who herself was a great Dalit woman leader who deserves recognition, and she herself was acknowledged across the border of India. And I think she needs to be part of our collective thinking for all the Dalit community, to look at her life and her spirits, and of course, how they together contributed to an anti-caste struggle. Of course, Mithai Devi Biswakarma was the first Dalit woman graduate that Nepal ever had. And I think that's an incredible citation to have. Let's give it up in the honor of Mithai Devi Biswakarma for her excellent work. And speaking about her really brings us many memories. And she not only was somebody who was the partner, but she was an active agent in the Pashupatinath temple satyagraha, where there were agitations and where dogs and untouchables were not allowed, and these were the people who led the struggle. And this is kind of one of the interesting phases we continue to see. Another important figure I thought was deserves mention is Mr. D.B. Parihar. D.B. Parihar, again, one of the founding members, the core of Nepali Congress, and also the first film director of Nepali cinematic industry. And I think this is a big honor for us, and had I known, and in fact, let me tell you the anecdote across India, the first actress of Indian cinema was P.K. Rossi, a Dalit woman. So there is something about pioneering, about art world that the Dalit people bring. And of course, if you look around India, Nepal, and anywhere else, these beautiful musicians and artists and performers are belonging to this community. So it's but natural that they are the ones who will give birth to new forms of creativity. With that, also I'd like to give a shout out to Padam Sundas, again a literary figure, a giant who laid the foundation of Samta Foundation, but also helped publish so many stories, so many novels, so many books, literature that paved path for many people of this generation to build upon and remain, and of course was appointed as an ambassador. Don't think so if there was a previous ambassador appointed in this position. Another figure, and radical Ambedkarite himself, Jawahar Roka. And now when I read about Jawahar Roka, especially his letter he wrote to Padam Sundas, I was really struck by the genius that this man had. He wrote in Nepali, and his house was called Ambedkar Kuti. That's a phenomenal statement, and I think that's the inspirational dais. And what is Jawahar Roka saying to Padam Sundas? He says, hey, we need to have an existence of a separate culture because we have always been separated. So we already have an existential autonomous cultural foundations. So he's arguing and he's writing to Padam Sundas that we should think about ourselves as a separate entity, as a cultural group that can think for itself. And then he goes, but we have to be careful. If we are establishing ourselves as culturally separate, we have to identify where is the social power lying. If the social power is unequal, then the people who have control on power will prioritize certain cultures so as to their privileges, and their hegemony is retained. A sharp man wants to establish a separate culture, but also wants to make sure that in this process, let us not get fooled and assimilated by the hegemonic powers, where the social power lays. And Jawahar Roka, in that phenomenal letter and his thought, proposes that we have to stay alert to such kind of potential possible assimilations that we might see today happening through various appropriations. And of course, I'll also give a shout out to late Subhash Dharnal, who was also a very important activist, lost too young, but anyway, but his legacy remains and continues. Now, the question that we have today is why Dalit lives matter? And I think I will answer that question towards the end, because if I answer the question, there's nothing else left to talk. But let me tell you that when we think about Nepali society, what are we usually thinking about? In the near memory, we are thinking of this as a theocratic monarchy. When we were in India thinking about it, we would think there is no country that would at least will tell fellow Hindus in India, especially the dominant caste Hindus, that there is no scope for you to think about yourself to form a theocratic nation state in a country, in a world where countries are leaving that and moving towards democracy, and that they would point out towards Nepal and the utopia of Nepali as a new kingdom that has a role model to look up to was something that there was this nostalgia attached to a Hindu Rashtra, a Hindu republic. And what that really means is, if you talk about Hindu Rashtra or Hindu state, you are essentially creating a society based on the ideas of hierarchies and deep-seated caste beliefs. Now, if caste system is a tenet of what forms a Hindu Rashtra, certainly then Nepal was a caste Rashtra forever when we think about its origins to the Hindu Brahminical notions. And when we think that Hindu Rashtra represents a certain foundational logic of religion, what we really miss out thinking that is this is essentially a Brahminical society where Brahminism is preceding and supervising over various forms of cultural, religious, social and political practices. And that just doesn't remain there. There is a certain Brahmin supremacy within the Brahminical project of the Hindu Rashtra that exists. And that's why when we see today's statistics, which we will come down, which we have already heard, when it comes to representation in political positions, when it comes to representation in media, when it comes to judiciary and so forth, this model is easily segued, translated into the construction of what we today have post-2015 constitutional republic state. Now, when we think about this question, one of the problematic notions that keep coming within at least Nepali history, and especially when we think about this through the Indian history, the era of mid-19th century, and what's happening, especially globally. Of course, we can think about the new churnings that are happening. Of course, the Industrial Revolution is taking place within the Western world, more particularly when you think about the Northeast America, the oil-based economy, the energies is becoming now translated into contributing to a centralized engine economy of America, especially, and then the democratic rights are being debated within the certain white elites who are identified as Boston Brahmins. Similarly, within the UK and Germanic fold, there has been this industrialization that's taking place. While that is happening, with that, there are two incidents that are happening in this part of the world, which is, one, there is a revolt that takes place in India because a Brahmin Sipahi doesn't like to use a cartridge that is made up of animal fat. And thus, he goes on to become what they identify him as the great revolutionary Mangal Pandey, who becomes what later was identified as essentially the first war of so-called India's independence. Around the same time, around a few years here and there, 1853 to 54, another sad episode occurs in Nepal with the promulgation of the Code of Nepal, which becomes essentially the Manusmriti of Nepal, Mulukain laws, which essentially normalized the brutalities and then brought about the various notions and definitions of surviving in a republic. And in this makeup of a new state by the then king, they established and paved path for the succeeding generations to build upon. And yet their model was very much rooted in how the laws of Brahminism remain central to the functioning of a state. Now, with that, it really brought about the same form of democracy that we see today in many ways. And what I mean by that is the idea of representation as opposed to the idea of representative. Who is the representative in the Republic of Representations? And when we see today, let's just look at the civil services, and we have the record of the 90,000 civil service posts within the Nepali bureaucracy. Only 2%, and if you look at the higher grade, only 0.7% belong to the Dalit community, and Dalit community, if we go by the government census, are nearly 14% of Nepal's population. If we redo the census, we might get the number higher than what we have. Nevertheless, that remains the figure. And when it comes to appointing the chief of the, or representatives on behalf of the, especially when it comes to reservation, the problem, again, supposedly the Nepali Congress, or you talk about the Maoist Center, they only have one representative to think about. So when we think about 1854, or when we think about 2022, 2023, we don't really see a kind of difference that we anticipate when we think about constitutional republic existing within the Nepali discourse. The same is then again, of course, represented, and it will be good to look at the judicial positions, who is appointed as the judges from lower bench to the Supreme Courts, and who is the person who is interpreting the Constitution, who is offering judgments on important matters related to the country and to the development of the states. Same problem we have been debating, to have reservation in judiciary. And then let's look at how power structures are then tokenized in many senses. Now, many times what we see, especially in the political structure, is if you think about important portfolios. Now let's just go by the top people within the Nepali Nepali political dynamics. The president is a Brahmin, Ramchandra Paudel. The prime minister is a Brahmin, Pushpa Kamal Dal. The speaker of the house, Devraj Ghimire, a Brahmin. The army chief, Prabhu Ram Sharma, is a Brahmin. Police chief is now, I think, is a Kshetri, Dheeraj Pratap Singh. But the acting chief justice is Hari Krishna Karki, you can imagine. Nepal Rashtra Bank governor, Mahaprasad Adhikari, a Brahmin. Now, if you look at all the discourses that's been framed, now all the major political parties who are representing, let's look at their name. Dahal, KP Oli, Sher Bahadur Deoba, Baburam Bhattarai, Madhav Nepal, Rabi Lamichhane, Rajendra Lingden, Mahanta Thakur, Upendra Yadav. You get it. This is essentially the republic that was formed in 1854. The seeds that you are seeing now is not an accident. It is meant to be the practice. That's how caste is normalized, through the practice of retaining the hegemony of the historically oppressor castes, who then control the resources of the state and then become the final adjudicator of the matters concerning nation, even though they do not constitute the majority. If you think about Brahmin as a group, their representation is not more than 12%. Yet, the overwhelming dominance of a singular Brahmin community, and if you add the Kshetris from here and there, it really becomes the Raj of the Brahmins and Kshatris on Nepal. And when you think about Dalits in this, they are tokenistic 1 to singular digit numbers. And if you look again at the Janjatis, that still remains the problematic interference that people are now not willing to make. This is the same statistics within the Indian sphere. In the top position, the gazetted positions, the joint secretary level positions, less than 7% people who make the actual decisions on laws and policies, less than 7%, are from 87% of the population of India. The Dalits, the Adivasis, and the backward caste, who constitute 87%. And their representation in the most important portfolio when it comes to deciding, when it comes to health policy, population policy, when it comes to anything related to person's welfare or the state's finances, are controlled by the 93% people whose population is merely 13%. That's the kind of inequality and broader dynamics that we ought to pay attention to. How can, if it's really a country that believes in democratic ethos, a priest of a temple belong to the same caste as prime minister of a country? If this is not the Brahminical republic that we talk about, then it certainly is not what a democratic constitutional state looks like. And that's the same problem we are also facing across the state. And it's not the same problem. When Kamala Harris was contesting for vice presidential post, her mother half was from a Brahmin caste, and that really became the important entertaining factor for people going under the radar of person of color, which really doesn't suffice the representative diversity dynamics of the local Brahminical elites who go under and benefit under the diversity quota under the color regime. Not to belittle their experiences within a certain white world, but certainly there remains this potent question as to where do we draw a line of morality and ethics. Now, if you really think that the representation is something that really needs to matter when we think about the question of Dalit lives or the lives of the minority people, then that representation is abysmally low. It's very frustrating and it's very negative when it comes to people, because whenever any issue of pride or dignity is put forward, it is received with an affront, because people are not used to. Caste society doesn't teach the people, the community, about equality. If at all it teaches anything, is inequality. And when you talk about inequality, you normalize inequality. And when somebody proposes and advocates for equality, you become the criminal of that society that is used to practicing inequality as its basic nationality. And that's why whenever we would approach to a question about proposing equality, Whenever we talk about having justice, the society that has never meant to acquire justice in its own foundations. If you are belonging to a certain caste and if you commit a certain crime, you are doubly or triply punished as opposed to a person who is belonging to the upper caste. That is what the 1854 law of this country was. And if that is the status, today if we ask for justice, it is never meant to appropriate, it is never meant to salivate. And that's why when we think, what is the demand for Dalits? The demand for Dalits is for equal share in the nation's wealth. Until and unless they are equally represented and the nation's wealth is equally distributed to them, there cannot be a really true democratic society. Minority communities cannot control the majority resources. Whatever resources that the people are bringing out cannot be exploited. And the Dalit community here has been one of the most skillful communities. They are the people who have been using sickle to cut the animal, the cow hide, and producing leather. The slippers and the branded shoes that we wear are coming from the same community. They are the same people who are using the logs of the wood and creating new artwork or chairs for our everyday purposes. This is the same community that is going and gathering a metal and creating something usable out of that metal. This is the same community that is using the ornaments and jewelries to make its livelihood. This is the same community that is going in the farm, producing cotton, and out of that cotton creating a fabric so that we can wear the clothes. This is the basic employment that runs, and this is the same community that ensures the sanitation of our society. These are the most essential services. If you don't have them in your life, just imagine living without clothes, without shoes, without having resources to nobody cleaning or maintaining the sanitation. Your life is as dirtier as you can imagine of a certain era. That's why the most essential servants or providers or services in the society is controlled and it's imposed upon the Dalits. But then when we talk about the dignity of labor, the dignity of labor will only come when you are given an opportunity to choose your profession. In a caste society, your labor is predefined. What you ought to do, what you can do, and what you cannot do is already preordained. All you have to do is just follow on the rule books. And so when you don't have any option, the dignity is there itself murdered. And that's why there is no concept of dignity of labor when it comes to Dalits exercising their labor and participating as an equal participant in the nation's economy. Because their labor is considered lower. Why? Because their birth is considered lower. So anything they produce, anything they do is considered polluting. People will not share food of a Dalit person. If they cook food, they will not share the food of this person. And these statistics can be related not just to Nepal, but also across the border within India and of course Pakistan realm. And again, caste is now no more a problem within the South Asian region. It has transited comfortably to the rest of the world, where we can, of course, see how now caste-based laws have been debated and talked about. And of course, Seattle became the first city council in the world to outlaw caste, which is outside this region. And of course, California again is undergoing, is doing the same in America, and UK is already being debating for more than 15 years. So when we think about the representation of these communities, when we talk about what it really means to have a dignity of labor, we also have to understand that the labor Dalits perform is deeply unequal, is deeply hierarchical, is deeply coercive, it's deeply exploitative. And by the very measurements of it being so much disregarding of their self, whatever they produce doesn't carry the value. And if that doesn't carry the value, the product that they produce doesn't get assimilated into the nation's economy. And so thus they become an outcast just trying to live off the land-based occupations that Dalits have been doing forever, where they have been tending the soil, they have been growing up the crops out of this field, and yet the very crops they grow up, the very food we consume is not polluting, but the touch of that cooked food is polluting. The hypocrisy of caste society has become so banal that it is unimaginable to even argue with the people because they have lost the cause. And for us, fighting with the people who have lost the cause is really the people who have lost the sense of dignity and justice in their mind. And the people who lose this are looking at a very dangerous frontier. If an injustice boils to a level, the response is most likely violence. And if the violence then converts into becoming a social practice, we will have repeated civil wars in each society wherever there is caste-based violence taking place. And that's why the depth that Dalits have been acquiring in various small villages, they have been indebted to a local landlord. The local landlord who is then exploiting them for over 3 generations to 4 generations. I was looking at a case of a person in the book where a person just wakes up, carries the plow, goes to the field, and whatever produces, he's never seen the outcome of his labor. Because he has apparently taken a debt from a landlord who is making sure not only him, but his nephew, because he don't have children, is also brought into this bonded labor. And this is essentially how caste normalizes the oppression of people, which is simply based on their birth. So now, one of the questions is, if we have such a situation, what are the possibilities? What are the things we would like to do? And then many a times, when people hear the narratives of such nature, they would like to have a solution to this problem. And I think there cannot be a piecemeal, one-time solution. It has to be a recurring cultural process. And here, I would like to invite, especially the Dalits, to think about establishing their own cultural ethos that Jawahar Roka was arguing, was thinking. What is it that makes you special? Until unless there is a special, independent, autonomous identity, which it is already exists, but it exists as a lower, as inferior, why don't we embrace it and make it something that is equal and superior? That's something that gives you confidence to live every day, that you don't feel ashamed of owning up your own ancestors. Caste system is so wretched that it discloses us our own basic vulnerabilities, and when we realize that, we disown our own ancestors who have given birth to us just because of the caste epithets that have been hurled upon us. We don't have to interpret ourselves based on someone else's meaning. We have to think ourselves upon our own meaning, and we have to define our own existence not based on someone else's misunderstandings, but with our own ethic of being true citizens of this world who just taught the world how to love and forgive. Dalit existence is about pure love and forgiving existence. They have been forgiving, and they're not only forgiving for the people who are existing within themselves, they're also forgiving the people who have done the harms that they have not seen. This kind of pure nature needs to be embraced by the Dalit community. They need to have their own festivals and ceremonies. In India, the Dalit community don't participate in the Hindu rituals at all. We have given up on the brutalities of Hindu order. We have embraced different faiths. We have gone to different religions. For us, the most important day in the life of a Dalit in India right now is 14th April, the birthday of our Messiah and our liberator, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. We celebrate him because he made us stand on our feet without having to bow to the landlord's whipcord. We can now stand on our feet and we can look into the eyes and we can go to the constitutional court to seek justice. That's why we have replaced old brutalities with newer freedoms. And Dr. Ambedkar for us, 14th April becomes a day of jovial. 14th April, I invite you, go any part of India and you will be mobbed by people, by Dalits who are celebrating on the streets. This is probably the most attended. And what do Dalits do on the occasions of festivals? Any Dalit event in India you go, it is surrounded by books. The Dalits are going there for their intellectual appetite. They are going and purchasing the books. On 6th December, the death day of Dr. Ambedkar, the anniversary of Dr. Ambedkar, in Bombay, where his ashes are there, on that 6th December, if you go to Bombay, do visit the various spots and avenues. You will find people are buying books into thousands and thousands of rupees. That's the beauty of this community who has not stopped to learn and keep updated with what's happening new in the world. You will see different authors and different genres being discussed and debated. The Dalit community of Nepal also probably have to look at finding and starting a new culture that is truly their own coming. We cannot be the secondary subjects of someone else's interpretations. We have to be the first-class citizens of our first-hand imagination. Until and unless we do that, and for us to do that, we will have to rely on the cultural, social, religious myths. We have to establish what these new myths are going to say. Every country relies on profound myths. Myth is what keeps any nation united. There is no pure history of any country in the world. There are always myths that have been interpreted, and that's our legends, especially within the Dalit community in India. The Dalit Panthers and the Dalit literary figures have argued, especially Arjun Dangle and Babura Bagul. They say, unless and until Dalits provide their own and create their own myths, it will not be an easy assertion mode. And for us to assert, we have to identify our historical icons and make them part of our central worship. We need to bring them, we need to celebrate them, and for us to do that, we need to start also finding icons within ourselves who are also existing, whether in the past or the near past. And for us to do that, we have to find out special days that can be proclaimed as holidays, for national holidays. So when the nation is having a holiday, they know for whose reason they are having holiday. And let it be somebody from a Dalit community whose birthday is celebrated, whose contribution to the nation has been celebrated. And once the country knows this, the symbolisms are what is going to make the next generation strong and foundational. They will not be ashamed to own up their own ancestors. Imagine having your children not understanding you by the second generation. For us to do that, for us to not happen that, we need to create new cultural symbols and icons. And unless that is made a state project, it might just be another activism that is based on pure relationship of inequality. And for us, when we do this, let's also have certain weeks or certain days of commemorations. Let us also remember the people who have been victimized and brutalized by the system. And let us remember them, and let us tell the nation to mourn the loss of those precious lives that have been fallen victim to the caste discrimination. Until and unless the nation state takes cognizance of that, our struggle should not stop. And once we make that mainstream, we should just not be the token representatives. We cannot be tokenized. We have to be the next power brokers. And that's why, if we think about what's the future plan, the way I look at Nepal is, I hope in the coming decade, the Nepal's Prime Minister will belong to the Dalit community. And that Dalit community person, most preferably, let her be the woman. Let the Nepal's first Dalit Prime Minister be a woman who is leading the country with her example. When we had Sri Lanka's representative who was the Prime Minister from our region, the second time when the world talks proudly about Nepal, it should be about Nepal gave the former untouchable woman the leadership. And let her rule on the country for at least few terms, not just one term. So that we can then reproduce various forms of what it means to be a true belief, what it really means to form a country based on respect and fraternity. Fraternity is something that keeps missing. Dr. Ambedkar identified fraternity as a strong moral force. Fraternity, brotherhood, sisterhood. He found this value in Buddha's Dhamma, where he talks about the principle of karuna, compassion, the principle of maitri, friendship. The antidote to caste is karuna and maitri, compassion and friendship. The relationships built on friendships are something that are lasting. And for this, Guru Ravidas from the 16th century, one of the Chamar Dalit caste gurus who emerges profoundly, for him, the most valuable relationship is friendship. And he says, if you are willing to hold my hand and walk with me, you are my true companion. All the Dalits want is somebody to hold the hand and walk like equal till the place we are going to walk. We need those people who are willing to extend the hand and who can walk with same respect, no patronizing, but the idea of creating co-partner world. Unless and until we co-share this ethic, we cannot form a nation. It will be a broken independence that we have been fighting for, and whatever we will receive as an outcome will yet be much more rotten. And for us to clear these objectives, we need to imagine what are the possible outcomes of our work. Let it be clear, NGOs cannot liberate. The idea of civil society-led movements is not meant to have a profound movement, epochal change. This is always a neoliberal project that has been working around the concept of creating politics of identities as opposed to politics of structural difference. And that's why the Nepali consciousness that has developed through civil society is because the political and social sphere has not given much opportunities for the Dalits to exist. And it is because of their failure, the alternative that have come up is through civil societies. And if you look at civil societies, the civil society can give you job as a temporary employee for a few months or few years. But it cannot participate in creating a ground level change. The ground level change has to happen from a social movement where people are categorizing from village to taluka to districts and of course to the capital. Unless this solid foundation is created and categorizing is taking place, we cannot really expect a societal change. And if we expect for the oppressors, and this is a very interesting anecdote, if we can really think for the oppressors to have a benevolence, to have a pity, to have a sympathy, you already know the history. They don't have the capacity to have a sympathy. They lost the faculty of having a fraternity. So it is us, it is you who have to then congregate, unite and think about mounting an attack on the system. And unless and until we attack the system, the problems are always going to be very tokenistic on a very surface. And the surface is always changing its color while the root remains strong. That's why we have to think of ourselves as somebody who is going to the root of the problem, and thus change is going to take time, but is nevertheless an important change. That's why the names that I identified at the beginning of my talk are the people who have laid that foundation to have a long-term structural change. And let that vision inspire all of us as to what kind of work they would want it to do, and they did in their life. And for this absolute representation, it is also important that the civil society actors actively participate in serving the communities, not writing the report to the donors. The idea of donor-based economy has created so much of an unequal neoliberal project that unless and until you adhere to the cultural standards set by certain metropole, your grant is not approved for the next. And for that, you have to really make a cultural seismic shift based on the rule books created by somebody who's most likely sitting in the West, might have done a 1 year foreign 1 year abroad education program, or might have come by those person who might have come here to experience Nepal, or those people who might have just affiliated towards poverty. This unequal donor relationships, let it not bother the progress and the revolution that the Dalits are taking. But yet when the people who really would like to work upon, they need to humble themselves in the struggle of Dalit liberation. Unless we have those metrics applied, we cannot really think of what we call a societal change from the ground up. And for that to really take place, we need to see what is the step. I was reading this article, very excellent article by Mitra Pariyar, whose article I've read as well. He talked about cultural revolution needed. And in this he talks about that Dalit woman donated for a temple, and yet she was not allowed. This question amounts to me, why would you want to go to the temples? Of course, there is a certain spiritual solace you might get, but what is the rationale behind the temple economy and the spiritualism of such nature that has treated you untouchables? What is equal in that temple, in that God or that spiritual practice that is not even treating you? A very heart-wrenching case of the temple of where people were fighting to enter the temple. And I have this photo I would like to share with you, which was truly heartbreaking to see, where people are protesting against entry of temples. And this gentleman right here, his name is Hira Parik, and this is at the Salesbury temple. Now this gentleman right here, you can't see, but he's somewhere here in black and white. From 10 years of age, Hira Parik has been the musician outside the temple. For 10 years outside the temple. He never could enter the temple. And by the age of 74, when the temple agitation happened in Salesbury, people wanted him to go inside. He was so afraid that when they forced him to take inside, he yelled and he fainted. He couldn't think of himself going inside the temple. This is the kind of slavery, this kind of religious theocracy has brought upon you. So why do we think about the models? This is not really your ancestral faith. Let it not get wrong. Your ancestral faith has been more profound. It has been assimilated. It has been stolen by the Brahmins and made into a canon of Hindus. The reason Hindus have so many gods is because each caste have their own totemic faith. They have assimilated it, Brahminized it, and excluded you from participation. Now your ancestors who once fought against the same Brahmins, the Brahmins are worshipping but asking to stay outside because they have essentially Brahminized. And eventually, whatever best is out there, Brahmins have mastered the technique of assimilating them, appropriating them. You might notice Babur was considered Mlecha. They wrote a book. And they said Akbar as a reincarnation of a Brahmin. Meaning the Akbar's rule was considered, this is what has been written in the Quran by the Brahmins. So even a Muslim whose father is considered Mlecha, is a lower caste, is a dirty man, but his empire is considered a reincarnation of a Brahmin, and they created all kinds of myths. What is there for us to then fight for dignity? It doesn't mean we should give up on the spiritual practices. Let it be but let it not be subjugated to a Brahmin hegemony, because there again you will inferiorize yourself. This belief will never let you think independently. It will always make you think you are subjugated to someone else. And the moment you keep on thinking yes, you are inferior or subjugated to someone else, you become a secondary object of their beliefs. For us to then really think, what I think again a very inspiring image for me was, there is this Dalit woman who's using a sickle and who's cutting the hide, the skin of a dead cow. She's doing so skillfully. She's mastered the technique. If she can cut a skin of a cow, you better know she can cut a throat of any man who tries to oppress her. And yet, these ideals are not promoted as something essential and central to the life of Dalit, because they always have to meant to live as a secondary project. So the Dalit community, especially the political, have to have a Dalit agenda. They need to have a strong Dalit agenda that is non-compromising, and this is not subjugated or subordinated to the party agenda. Dalit agenda should be beyond political agenda, and Dalit agenda then should be a national agenda. Until you make that agenda a national agenda, you will always be the secondary victims of this society. You will be given a piecemeal, a tokenistic representation without power. The bosses will still be people. And why not also think about forming, if your population is so important, why don't you still consider form an independent political party? With the idea of proportional representation and FTPT, you can really be a game changer. And the politics that we have currently, where the Prime Minister is not from the majority party, but certainly has an important vote base, that political education has to be inculcated among the Dalits. And that confidence can come from those people who are thinking of themselves to rule. Your project has to become cultural as well as political. You cannot just stand by fighting for temple entries or having equal access, but you need, and your aim should be to rule, to be a ruling class of this country. Unless and until you have those two objectives clear, you will still be fighting against a big wall which is not welcoming you. The people who are still standing as the guards are the people who are potentially looking to attack you and eventually eliminate you. And that's why the question of reservation is becoming a much more problematic in this course. Reservation is often debated, reservation is often challenged, and reservation is becoming something of a manipulative trap. Now, we should understand that Dalits in this country, even though they are 13%, they have less than the statistics that we saw. The representation is very dismal, less than 2 in important positions, less than 1%. And even if you consider overall representations, only 4.5% goes to them. So what is this real policy doing? What do we really do? Let reservation not be the only final verdict of your future. You have to think about other basic resources. How about owning up a land? How about redistribution of important resources? Unless and until these become the central political thinking of everybody, we cannot really think of forming a new imagination of a new Dalit politics. And I really hope that the Dalits of Nepal offer us that leadership that we are so desperately hoping to. And with this, we can then work together as something who can really show the world how to run a state, how to run a society. We have to take that responsibilities. And I'm really giving a 1 decade's time. Time is less. What can we more do to join the forces. Because as you can see, as this US report says, the BJP politicians are lobbying for a Hindu Nepal again. So their project is already on the go. It might deny, there might be rumors, there is a lot of representations, but the idea of Hindu Rashtra, the idea of that republic is still existing. And so finally, what is the conduct and what do the Dalits want? I think the first is that the Dalits need good life. They need respectable life. They need dignified life. But more than that, they also need education. And with education, they need representation. And representation is what we call deservation. Reservation and deservation. We deserve that position. That has to be clear and clarified in the mind. And many people who would like to work with us in solidarity should know that the Dalit question is a deeply historical one. It's coming from the position of vulnerabilities, it's coming from the position of trauma, it's coming from the position of what we call fear. And when the Dalit is speaking, it's not just one person speaking, it's the innumerable countable lives that have not had the opportunity to express are expressing now. And when their expression is coming, we have to learn to listen and give a patient hearing. Let us not pass judgments on what a slippery note might make you uncomfortable. A Dalit position is always going to be a position that is going to be diagonally probably the opposite to what we are understanding. But nevertheless, that is the position we should embrace and we should think. And that's why do Dalit lives matter? I think it's because dignity matters. Dignity matters, respect matters, compassion matters, humanity matters, equality matters, stories matters, fight matters, resistance matters, humor matters, honor matters, justice matters, peace matters, more importantly, individual precious life matter. That's why Dalit lives matter. Thank you. That's taking place. But it's very ironical that the people who will propagate the idea of all lives matter are the same people, if they are in the West, would talk about their own experiences as mattering. So the people, let's say in America, who would advocate for all lives matter are usually the stereotypical people from the South and even North now. Since the Trump era, there's a certain deficiency of thought. And the people in Nepal who advocate for such broad-based identity and solidarity themselves are victims in a global picture. But yet there is a very strong relevance for them to draw upon what's happening in the world just because they don't want to give us the dignity that we are arguing for. And why the question is because the very essence of Dalit life is to ask for two things. One is equality, and two, justice. Dalits are not asking more than that. Within this broader frame, they're not asking hegemony or what Marx said, dictatorship of the proletariat. We are saying equality for all. We are not saying give us or make us the tyrant. We are saying we just ask what's our share, give to us. And second, we are asking for justice. If a society is unable to give these two things, that means the society has lost its moral conscience and everybody should worry. If we cannot provide these two basic needs to the people, then we are really facing a very dark future. And if the younger generation is not mentored in this way, to think about values of recognizing everybody, then I think the question that you and I and many of us are thinking, fighting and discussing about will really extend the project to many years.
Thank you, Suraj. I'll take 5 questions first. Please be precise, so we have many friends in this room. So, and second, if you don't want to ask the questions, but if you want to ask to the writing, some of my colleagues can pick up your writing question also.
And I have asked one question to him because I have been fighting with my family also about the caste caste issue that I have been convincing them that we are not lower caste, we are made lower caste by this so-called upper caste, and they are not convinced yet. And you have also told that if they are not like convinced, then leave them. Now I have left them. I have moved out from the family. So I don't want my parents to leave thinking that they are lower caste. And please tell me, how can I convince them? I don't want to make them like, let them die knowing that they are low, they are untouchable. And I want them to like be confident that we are Dalits and our Dalit lives matters, our dignity matters. And another thing is that I might be like offensive, but I do not trust a non-Dalit at all. I do not. So, because there are so many non-Dalits everywhere in the top position, I feel like scared that will I be alone in this movement, because we have to seek help from non-Dalits, but I don't trust non-Dalits. Will I be alone in this movement? Will I get this dignified life when I don't trust non-Dalits at all? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll go back.
So involved in the fascination between the interaction of Dalit Panther and Black Panther, right? And you talked about the importance of myth, history, and political representation. So I was thinking more about the significance of military intervention, like in Nepal possibly. So yeah.
Modern education system is failure to defend the caste system in Nepal. And here in Nepal education system, यसले चाहिँ अझै त्यो कास्ट सिस्टमलाई अझै बढी चाहिँ यसले बढावा चाहिँ दिन्छ र सायद नेपालमा हामीले अझै यसको समय भएन यो एजुकेसन सिस्टमको चाहिँ अल्टरनेटिभ खोज्ने भन्ने मेरो प्रश्न छ। मेरो नाम किरण विक।
Yeah, thank you. Please go ahead.
I think thank you for asking those very important questions, and I think I would like to invite you to please ask whatever questions you have in your mind. Let there no be hesitation. Whatever you feel, please express. It should not be a space of fear and intimidation. It should be very much an open space. So please, I thank you one more time for asking. The first question, I think it was loosely translated that why do we bring army into this? They are very special. I think that's a very fair question. But what makes them special is the question. Are they not belonging from the society? Do they still not practice from the society? They are not people who have been divorced from society. They still have certain celebrations or festivals. They still have certain values they bring into. Certainly the army cantonment might be a different space than what they call civilian space. But nevertheless, the question that begs is, if we are at all about thinking diversity in this respects, why don't we have also an army chief? Like, very interesting, when Barack Obama became the president, one of the first things he did was he made the chief of staff a black man. That was, in fact, the contribution of black people. And similarly, we are arguing for that even in Indian context, because the people who are relying on defense forces are mostly belonging from people from Dalit and other oppressed caste communities. That's the space. It's not to talk against the institution of army. It's to say how we can make it much better, much more colorful, much more useful, much more representative of the country's demography. And then, of course, you don't want to be a soldier for several generations. You also want to become the top brass. And when is the time? And that's the kind of questions I was kind of proposing. And is becoming PF enough? That's a good start. Why don't we start with that and lay our expectations on the PM when the person becomes PM? Because I think that's the kind of view we need to have. Because if we don't have that vision, we will be relegated to a very limited work and limited objective. That's why what Sulochana was saying, I very much remember her from the last time of the work, is she's referring to about parents and how to deal with parents, and especially Sulochana, yours is a case that is not unique, but it applies to many of us. And in this case, you have to be yourself a big model for them. And once you become that big model, they really love you, they really appreciate you, but you really need to become someone that they will be truly proud of publicly as well as. And once you become that you can, this convincing power, that's what I'm saying. Like this Hira Parikh guy, 10 years, 74 years, 64 years he was doing the same job. He couldn't have thought of entering the temple, let alone sanctum sanctorum. That's the kind of, and it's not your parents' fault. It's the fault of the society that has made them victims of this mentality. And for us, we have to break that. That's why we have to find alternatives. And we cannot compromise. That's why I offered my views on the religion as well as the theocratic society that we have. And clearly, you not trusting non-Dalits is because you have that experience. And your experience cannot be undervalued. Your experience is truly yours. And I cannot come and tell you, stop thinking like that, because your personal childhood traumas, your exclusions, the way they made you feel lower, they made you feel insecure, the way they feel you that you don't belong, these are very bad experiences for a child to have. And now that is rooted in you. And for you to then overcome that, you really need somebody from that caste to make a case for you. And that's why we open the space also for the oppressor castes to decaste themselves. And they don't have to do that with us. What I call also in my book, they have to become cultural suicide bombers. They have to blow up their cultural privileges in the service of abolishing caste. Unless and until that happens, it will merely be a milquetoast sort of solution that you get. It is going to be a very performative. We want a real kind of solution. Tashi asked the question about Black Panthers and Dalit Panthers, and in fact, after coming here, speaking to Pradeep, I'm hoping there's one project on global caste where we are trying to study caste in different parts of the world. Some places it's a religious-based caste system. Some places it's a tribal caste system. Some place it's what we have color-based caste system. So we have this project, and we would hope to do it in Nepal actually to really kind of gather people to think about this new frontier of the 21st century for how we really understand caste system and really think it of as a global problem. Not Nepali problem, not Indian problem or one country problem. It's really a global problem, because what are the tenets of caste? Let's understand that. Caste is something that you get without having to do anything, which is your identity. Your mother's womb is the register of your future. If your mother's womb is belonging to a certain caste, you carry that caste till the time you grave. Now the first one of the first minister from the Dalit community, Hiralal. Now, very unfortunate, I was asking and I was told the first minister for his daughter's marriage, the king and the queen had come. When he died, they're not giving him the cremation space. That's the status. The first minister, the ministers, the kings come and go, but yet he has to fight after his death for that place. And for us, what we need to do is to think about how caste manifests. It's the identity given from your birth, the hierarchy that is central tenet of this. You cannot move from the ladder of what branch you belong to. You cannot cross over. If you do, you become Nabraj and many other scores of people who have been fallen victims of this. And in addition to that, what you do is you practice a sincere religious ethic or social ethic, which is to see yourself as somebody who is superior and somebody who thinks himself as inferior. That is the pernicious outcome of caste system. And for us, we need to contend. That's why the Dalit Black Panther kind of movement, of course, I'm one of the ones now trying to reinvigorate and think about the radical movement, because our struggle that we are fighting has to think about structural issues that also encompasses the class-based divisions that society has created. Unless and until we pay attention. Unfortunately, the Maoists here, most of the people, at least in India, the Maoists who belong to the lower caste, but the leaders were Brahmins. I don't understand that a temple priest who is not allowing Hira to go inside temple is the same caste person leading a revolutionary movement. Where does this logic sit? It is this absolute obsession with power. You don't want to lose the sight of power and control on the lives of people. That is entertaining. And that's the kind of critique we need to offer to this system. And for us to really think that, we really need to identify the loopholes within the system, and we need to call it out loud. We need to call it on the face, and it doesn't matter, because you receive an opportunity after thousands of years of silence. And so when you are going to whisper, it's going to be like a storm, and let the storm wipe away people's insecurities who are trying to hold on to the rigidity of caste system. Many times, I was in a program in Pune. Brahmins had a kingdom there once, the Peshwas, and they invited me to, not Brahmins, but other people invited me to, of course Brahmins were in the audience, their descendants. So they invited me and they wanted to know, and I told them, it has to be a moral project for you, because the winds of change is coming. You can see that. You would not have anticipated Nepal to become a constitutionally republic nation, but it has become. The many changes you are anticipating are now happening. So the problem of caste will also be tackled, if not by this generation, at least 2 generations from now. So why don't you be in a good books? And when your descendants will look up to you, at least they will be proud and not ashamed to say, this old man was my ancestor who was so dirty that he practiced caste system. Don't be that ancestor of your descendants who will be hateful of you and who will hide their photos, like one of those descendants of people who participated in the pogrom, in the genocide in World War, especially when it comes to the Nazi Socialist Party and various people. They don't now have shame. They are ashamed. They cannot claim that identity because it was such a bad system. Something similar will happen. The justice will be met. So it better you be on the side who was one of those guys you see in the photo when people are giving the Hitler salute, and there is one guy who's not giving the salute, and he's celebrated. Be those unique models, and for that you need to be courageous. You need to think about how change is going to come in next generations, and better be prepared for those changes.
What specific measures do you suggest for empowering individuals from marginalized caste and ensuring their representation in positions of power and governance? How can we engage with traditional caste-based...
Two questions is enough for now.
If you live in a society, if you breathe air that is very much caste in nature, they're already practicing, knowing or without knowing. Especially when you come to college level, your compulsory course that you need to pass has to be a course against caste. There has to be a curriculum where you are assessed, where you are giving an exam, and if you come out with a good grade, then only go to next class. It has to be made a compulsory, and for that we need more stories from the Dalit community, from the Janjatis, from the minorities, to kind of inform us, to have the scholarship. One problem that we see is, when it comes to question that was raised on quota and reservation, is the absence of representation. So reservation is to have a policy of representation. So if a community is not represented, reservation is given for community, not individual. And if you are a part of a community that is underrepresented, that means you have to fill the seat. And so it doesn't matter your financial status, you ought to fill the place. If people are really concerned about poor people from the community, there are so much economic elevation programs. There are so much finance-related initiatives that are available. But this specific mandate is to have adequate democratic representation of everybody who can participate in making the new nation. It is not made for those people who are already overrepresented. Now the problem that happens, what Tabassum was raising and what other people were raising, is like, we come from a well-to-do background, but my community's representation is not adequate. What do I do? Well, you need to fill the seat, because this is the idea of need and supply. Now, if they wait for some Tabassum to come from Madhes region who is this much qualified, they will have to wait. You are an exceptional case. You are probably one of the people of maybe a couple million. And so what they don't want is, they don't want Tabassum to come. and her community to come, because they know for sure that Tabassum is an exception because of her family circumstances. But if they're looking for an ideal candidate, they're never going to get it, because they will keep adding various metrics. Even if you come from that quota system, they will still tell you you need certain marks. If you need that, they will add certain metrics of your geography, your linguistic ethnicity. It will never end. So, the ideal purpose is, once we have adequate representation, certainly, then we can talk about these various metrics, about adding. Doesn't mean the poor is not appreciated. It is meant for the poor. It is meant for the people who are most marginalized. But what do we have now? Should we give up on that representation so it becomes a precedent? So for a future policy maker, they will find no Muslims. And then they will think that Muslim candidates are available. So where this position will go to? It will go to those people who are already dominating the portfolio. At the end of the day, they have to fill the jobs. They have to fill the admission quota. So this is a very intelligent yet nefarious strategy of people to undermine that. And we need to then think about how these questions are addressed. And now it's a quota system. It's not like your affirmative action. Affirmative action is not as strong as what we have quota. There you have to rely on the whims of the order. If the company CEO thinks or the board thinks, then they apply. Or else, but here it's a quota, you have to mandatorily fill, which is what is progressive about India's reservation, or even in this case the quota system we have in Nepal. Of course, it's influenced in many sense by that. And I think we need to celebrate that, because now we are opening doors to those people who we never thought will be equally participating in the change of nation. And let me tell you, it's so economics. I'll tell you how, and people need to understand. Right now,
you have to be very brief.
Right now, you have people who are paying taxes, and many of them paying taxes. The burden is coming on them because they're not enough people paying who are tax-paying people. How about we decrease the burden of those people who are paying so much taxes? How do we do that? We bring more people into workforce. We create this kind of a labor economy where people are then equally contributing to this force. But we don't want to do that. We want to still pay more tax and yet complain on the nation. This is never going to be a fine balance. And the question on the book, I think if you go to last chapter, it is talking about Brahmins as well. It's talking also about the Kshatriyas. The uniqueness of that book has been, I think, is that it has not confined the caste question to only Dalit. Certainly Dalit is one of the important players, but it talks about the hegemony of Baniyas, the Vaishya community, who has access to capital. It also talks about the dominance of people who are from historically land-owning castes. And of course, it also talks about Dalits and Adivasis, and as well as the Brahmins, what you call Janjatis and the Brahmins here. So I think it kind of encompasses, but clearly the advice is well taken. Maybe it can be more elaborated in the next or one of the forthcoming works.
What can government of Nepal can do to be more inclusive in terms of making education policy? Education policy ma चाहिँ के गर्न सक्छ नेपाल सरकारले?
A Muslim by religion and a minority in my own country. Thank you so much, Dr. Yengde, for being here. And what you said really hit close to home for me as well, because being a minority, I definitely resonate with the elites in Nepal, and not just Nepal, but throughout South Asia in general. My question is sort of like a follow-up question about what you said about reservations and quota system in Nepal itself. When we talk about reservations and representation, Nepali society, well, the elites in general, they believe that such reservations should be open only for the financially weak communities, even within the underprivileged communities itself, right? So what do we have to say about this farce or this myth behind the quota system and the reservation system? Because me being a minority, I believe that I am a privileged member of my community, regardless of being a Muslim, and I recognize that as well. And I always try to make sure that I come across this discourse about talking about reservations, about proving my privilege as, you know, a Muslim, not just as a Muslim, but as being a really privileged member of my community as well. But regardless, besides saying that I think we should also always believe that this representation and this inclusivity did not come to us easily. it was a really, really hard task for us as well. And when I speak, I don't just speak for myself. There's a whole different big community behind me, and that I am a representation of that community as well. But my story is not the whole story of my community as well. So, and just because I am a privileged member does not mean that I should be excluded from that reservation system.
I think I realized you have kind of missed to present the comprehensive picture of caste in India. Like you talk more about Dalits, but and it kind of you reinforces that caste is only a problem of Dalit. So are you planning to come up with some comprehensive picture of caste in India in your future work? Thank you.
Because often when we talk about injustices that are systematic in the world, there's a very strong economic case for it. For example, when you talk about black racism, it's often an economic term used to justify colonial changes and everything, right? Is there a similar case we can make for Dalits in this case?
के भन्छ म चमारो म मधेसबाट मेरो क्वेसनलाई चाहिँ ट्रान्सलेट गर्दिन होला सो अघि यङडे सरको चाहिँ स्पिचमा धेरै कुराहरू मधेस दलित आन्दोलनको कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ मधेसी दलितको इतिहासको कुराहरू पनि अलिकति छुट्या जस्तो लाग्यो कारण के होला भन्ने त अलि सोचिरहे कतै यो आन्दोलनको दलित आन्दोलनको कुरा गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ विशेष गरी पहाडी दलितको हाबी भएको र ती मधेसी दलित पनि छन् अनि एक टिममा अथवा चाहिँ कुरा गर्दाखेरि यसको बारे पनि अलिकति ओरिएन्ट गरिदिए है त्यो कुरा आउँथ्यो होला जस्तो लाग्छ आन्दोलनको गर्नु पर्यो त केही कुरा गर्नु पर्यो नि नाम चाहिँ आउँछ तर काम गरेरमा साथ हुँदैन त्यो कारणले गर्दाखेरि चाहिँ याङडेको सुझाव चाहिँ नेपाली दलित अधिकार कर्मीहरूलाई चाहिँ समेटेर जानलाई के हुन सक्छ भन्ने चाहिँ मेरो जिज्ञासा छ
She said that she does not trust the caste people because if I'm benefiting from the system, and why would I want to let go of my privilege and fight for changing the status quo, right? So my question to Mr. Yengde is, what are the incentives for the so-called upper caste people to fight for equality unless it's benefiting them or for their own benefits?
Dalit Matters को लागि चाहिँ धेरै रोलहरु खेले जस्तो लाग्छ यसमा तपाईको केही भनिदिनुहुन्छ कि
So my question is about is true Dalit liberation really possible under current political and economic framework, a political framework that rewards those with the highest amount of votes and the economic framework that rewards those with the highest amount of capital. So is that really possible under these two frameworks? Yeah, that's all.
A lot of movement have been going on right now. There is Black Lives Matter that has been coming as a movement against racial discrimination. Even if you talk about Nepal, in Nepal there are a lot of movements going on. Dalit movement, LGBTQI movement and other movements as well. But you see that these movements are always fragmented. The feminist movement, so they talk about the woman leadership and woman empowerment, but then again when we talk about intersection, we don't see that collective negotiation, collective movement coming together, despite the fact they say that we are talking about Madhesi women as well, or we are talking about Dalit women as well. So how do you think would be the way forward for movements like this to go in future and come collective so they can actually exert that pressure on the oppression level? Because when we see all the movement, the oppression, the people or the group oppressing, all these groups are almost similar. The same faces, the same community, but the movements are going on an independent basis. So how do you think that collective bargaining, collective negotiation could be a way forward, and how we can take that forward? Thank you.
Relying on your own self-resources. They are not many, but we have to do it. And that's why many of the radical movements that came about had an element of Dalit assertion. So if we are expecting a person from a caste privilege to be somebody who can participate, that's a good expectation. They're welcome to participate. But on what terms? Will they bring their terms and conditions? I will only participate on this and this day, other day I have to go to temple and offer my puja, or I have a fasting to do, or whatever that is. It's going to be a very cultural, deeply problematic question. And so what is it for the dominant caste people to give up in this struggle? I think the one thing they can do is they can correct their ancestral wrongs. Whatever wrong that have been happening in their lineage, they could put a stop to this dirt that has been coming through their lives. Second thing they could do is they could really embrace the true meaning of being a human who who has the capacity to love and share. Caste system doesn't allow you. It is monopolizing on the resources. The question that gentleman was asking, can we make it a case of economics? It's monopolizing on resources. And when you monopolize on resources, you are facing different dimensions of this. And that's where it comes, your positionality is critically observed. For that, we need to really uplift the stories of those people. And historically, also, people from dominant caste have participated in liberation against caste. But they have not been many. They have been very singular, and they have been wiped off of the memory. We need to also pay attention to that. But they don't become inspirations for the people from their own communities. So if you are participating in anti-caste struggle, one thing you are certainly doing is you are cleansing yourself internally and externally. It's a deeply therapeutic exercise. The more you will be challenged, the more real you will keep getting. What we have done is we have put a lather of different types of viciousness, hatred, violence upon us. And that layer has become so strong and concretized that you are unable to break through this cement. By being in the company and being an anti-caste person, you can slowly get rid of that and really touch your own self in your own vulnerable, at your own vulnerable moments, in your own space. And that's a very profound, long-term, spiritual, as well as political exercise. Now, many of people, caste is basically stupidity that has been taught to kids. If you ask a question, if a kid asks a question, parents don't necessarily have answers. Parents say, don't go and spend time with that person. Or, you are not allowed to come. Why am I not allowed to come? What is it? Why am I not smart enough? We are all equal, but we are not unable to fathom, we are unable to confront that. That's why, if we are from a dominant caste, come and become an anti-caste for your own good. And once you become anti-caste, don't just be anti-caste, be a cultural suicide bomber. Take a next step. Go into your own communities and be the change. You don't need to occupy Dalit spaces if you really want to be an anti-caste. I have wrote in my book as well, the Brahmins need to start an organization, Brahmins against Brahminism, Brahmins against caste, Kshatris against caste, until and unless we internalize and personalize. Because let me tell you, it's not just a Dalit and non-Dalit issue. Caste has sub-castes. And when the marriage is taking place, if you're a Brahmin, they are looking for what type of Brahmin you are. And if you're from a lower caste among the Brahmin hierarchy, you are still catching insults and disrespect by your own people. So why don't we then look it as a really deeply cleansing project where it is way more moral. And we have to realize we are climbing an uphill. We are climbing a mountain with a rucksack full of unnecessary pebbles and stones. If you want to go up, the easiest way is to remove them from your baggage. You can go easily. But we want to carry that unnecessary thorns in our back and want to make an ascent on a high altitude. You're going to keep suffering. The practical logic for any good climber is, let me get rid of this unnecessary weight. We need to get rid of the weight of caste. You might not realize it, but it's impacting your own individual psychological cognitive growth. Because you're unable to think about opportunities and unable to think of other human as an individual that has the capacity to think exactly like you, that has the capacity to dress, to speak, to compete, to operate in society exactly like you. But by you being a casteist, you don't see the person as other human, you see the person as inferior person. And then you are afraid, how come this inferior person is going into big universities? How is this lower person getting into parliament? There is something wrong in this. And because you are miseducation, this process has kind of happened in making of what we have today. And that's why this kind of questions that were kind of brought together about economics of caste. It is about this. It's about monopolizing resources. But what do they do is, how do they monopolize the resources? They don't use the language of economics. They use the language of culture and religion, the faith. And through that logic, it becomes a moral order of a certain spiritual nature that now you have to follow. Dr. Ambedkar again talks about here in this sense, where he says, caste, a person who is practicing, you cannot blame that person. But what is the reason that is making that person to practice caste? And he identifies these are Hindu Dharma Shastras. And he says you should apply dynamite to them because they are not proposing equality. This is the radical Ambedkar 1936. The Hindus were scared. How can we allow him to speak? And they were inviting him to speak about annihilation of caste. These are the critical measures, and for that, many a times, being an anti-caste person also would mean to give up on the family privileges. Our families are one of the very pungent, strong adhesives that encourage us to maintain caste. Family institution, right from our family, from our parents, siblings, and so on, it kind of goes ahead. To the question of Rita about the faith and the attack on the faith, I think it is about the practice of how the faith is exercised in society. Has there been any Hindu temple in Nepal that has advocated for annihilation of caste? Give me one example. Give me one religious head of the Hindu community who said, enough of caste system, we cannot deal with it. Let's get rid of it. Has that happened? So if you don't have dignity, and if they're not proposing, in fact, they're advocating for your more slavery. As they equated you with dogs outside temples. And so the point is that a Dalit can become Brahmin, or the Brahmin can also become Dalit based on education and work. It is not true. Because if I have to see my education, I don't think the Nepali Brahmin have as much qualification as I alone have. Am I Brahmin? So this argument is failed in its own logic. Because I have the titles and degrees that you will only dream of. But yet, I am not your equal because you think of yourself as a Brahmin and you'll never give me access to the Brahmin. Because if I become a Brahmin, I want access to the resources and the khajina, the treasure of a temple. And access to the resources of various states that are generating revenue. Will I be giving that access? Will they make me the Mathadish or the priest head of this? Will they make me the chief of various spiritual practices? It's not going to happen. So this argument that it is based on work and then you can become a Brahmin is incorrect. This is the most polite way of saying. But the second question, Wadlog, is asked about how do we then deal with the intra-caste divisions that are there with the question of Madhesi representation and non-representation. And I think this is a very central aspect. What connects to what Shelley was asking. A true representative organization cannot afford to have diversity within its own makeup. And it can be diversity of any form. And certainly, if we have an initiative like Dalit Life Matter or any initiatives, not just here, but anywhere else, they have to have representation of marginalized people. And that's how you see how it is made up. But the narratives of people from that part, who have been, the people like Vishwakarma and all who have been participating, have to be now taken into a common programmatic agenda. Shelley was saying about this, she was hinting about this, about what do we do of people, and this is a very interesting thing. And I think you guys need to know what really means to be a good ally, how it means to be in solidarity. For that, you need to unlearn many things. If you truly believe in the quality of the life of the person who your ancestors have brutalized and enslaved for many generations, you will at least have that modicum of tinged respect towards those people who are now speaking. But our people who would like to have solidarity, they come with their own aspersions and they forced upon us like one of those donor agencies. and they would like you to follow on their models. It has to be autonomous. What is the local cultural conduit? Unless and until you pay attention to that, you will not be able to move forward. Now, there are certain societies that are deeply patriarchal, and they need to be changed. But can you change just by proposing that we will want you to change this? It will be merely tokenistic change. If you want a true change, it has to come from a social movement, and that's going to be a long-term process, a long-term investment. So one has to invest into a long-term project, not something which is a agenda-based files that we have to clear for our next budget year. That's not going to work out. That's not going to work in our favor. And many times we have noticed people, a Dalit viewpoint is so disrespected and disregarded that when you say something, they will always accuse you of something else. You might not even in a role to play. They will tell you, if you are a male, you are a misogynist. If you are a female, you are queerphobic. If you are a queer person, they will say you are a transphobic. It's never going to end. This Olympics of identity representation has to be culminated into a characteristic struggle of a structural revival where caste, like class, becomes an indicator of forging alliances. But unfortunately, we have not seen the allies or so-called people pretending to be, because what they want to do is they want to use our emotions as their cushion to come and feel relieved. And once they realize that the real critique is coming against them, they will immediately leave you right then and there exposed, vulnerable, making you more prone to attacks. That kind of dishonesty has been practiced within many of anti-caste liberation struggles. It doesn't mean that the anti-caste sphere is against any form of people who are fighting for justice. Our primary aspect is about justice. And certainly we think about justice in a way that might not be attuned to the education you have received, because you are somebody who gave orders and it was followed. You ring a bell and the food was there. You just call a person and the dead cow was cleaned. And now the descendants of those people are sitting with you as equal. It's not going to work out by you ringing a bell. So what do? You accuse the person of the most worst nature. And that's how they want to eliminate and absorb critical, radical Dalit voices. This has been an unfortunate trajectory of this neoliberal cultural activism that we have seen. It has lost the vision of how identities are meant to create a cogent politics. The Dalits, especially in Nepal, should really look up to Dr. Ambedkar and his struggle. And what it really meant. Your preceding generation did that. And they really drew inspiration from that. T.R. Biswakarma, Jawahar Roka, Padam Sudha. These are the people who are alive, who were alive in their spirits and contributed to this. So that's why solidarity is basically vulnerability. Are we willing to be vulnerable? If I am vulnerable, then I can connect to you based on those insecurities that has given rise to my vulnerability. And once I realize that, I will also see you as someone, but I will be also cognizant that I am somebody with certain privileges. How can I make my position much more concrete to create pathways for you and not become a barrier? Many a times, our friends from the dominant caste communities, from different kind of identities, become a big barrier to the change we want, because then they will start playing a office type of politics to describe an entire Dalit community or movement. That's not going to work out. So we need really people who are going to humble themselves. And humbling is a truly cherishing experience. You need to cherish what is to be humble. You are never taught to be humble. You are never taught to call somebody with respect, especially people who belong to what you call lower caste or outcast. But this is the time to that. And if you are expecting Dalits to still follow the model, it's not going to happen, because now we are educated, we are smart, we are brilliant, we are sassy, and we are expensive. It's going to be difficult for you to buy in just by your own wishes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suraj. Thank you. Please round of applause. Last message?
Yeah?
30 seconds?
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead. Your last message, anything? There's 100 people, if they can take any action.
Well, I think...
Not now.
I think the people who really believe in the struggle should really go and talk to their friends and families and organizations and supporters to really see how we can make really a structural ground-up change. I'm really hoping that the Nepali Dalit community sends at least 20 scholars abroad to pursue PhD. There has to be a structural change, and for that to happen, how can we contribute to making a change from certain minor aspects, but also be equally responsible that this change is not going to mimic what is already existing. This change is going to be something different. And for us to have that, I think everybody here should at least have a couple of anti-caste sessions, what it really means, what is really caste. And unless we do that, we'll really not understand the forthright nature of how caste is assaulting us. So just go back home, think about it, digest it, don't agree, disagree, that's all your private narrative, but make sure that you will be cognizant. You are witnessing an era where when people are brutally killed just because they managed to love a person who belonged to different caste. And if you're unable to see that struggle, it's a great blindfoldedness. When Nazi party was in power, the people of Germany were still going on holidays. They were not aware that the Jews and the minorities were brutalized and killed. This is the kind of nature that's happening. So please pay attention to certain nature, or else democracy will be in peril.
Thank you very much, Suraj. Thank you so much. You are very at the end of Dalit Life's Matter Caste Conversation, the first edition. I'm very thankful to Dr. Suraj Yengde for allowing his time between his busy schedule. Thank you, Dr. Suraj. I also extend my gratitude to each and every one of you present here today, Member of Parliament, Harkamaya Vishwakarma, Santosh Pariyar, diplomats, delegates from embassies, government partners, CSOs and media. Thank you very much for your support. I want to acknowledge few names, Parvati Bisulke, Dr. Madan Pariyar, Dr. Manvike, Adani Padam Sundas, Finally, my thank you to team Dalit Lives Matter, Saidi, big round of applause, Brahmanandaji, and thank you everyone, thank you each one of you. Hope you will take something from here, and we'll see you soon somewhere. Thank you very much. Have a good night.